Prarambh, Utsaha Parambalam. Taking inspiration from Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi's vision. Let us ignite the next major movement for startups. Let's celebrate the ideas and the excitement. Let's exchange awareness and knowledge. Let's expand the horizons. Let's establish accolades. Let's embrace. Let us initiate. Prarambh, Utsaha Parambalam. Startup India International Summit.
Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the afternoon session of Prarambh. And we have for you a very interesting session on global best practices for the startup ecosystem. And I have with me experts from around the world who have played a critical role in growing their national startup ecosystems to talk about what works, what doesn't work, and what are some of the learnings that we can use in India. You know, they say that give a man a fish and you will feed him for the day, but teach him to fish and you will feed him for life. To me, that embodies the spirit of entrepreneurship. That is why entrepreneurship plays such a critical role in the development of economies around the world. And 2020 was a stress test of the resilience, of the staying power of this entrepreneurship ecosystem, of the startup ecosystem. And it was fantastic to see how startup ecosystems across the globe not only pivoted and grew even stronger in the crisis, but the role they played in driving cutting-edge innovation that was used by so many countries in their fight against COVID. Definitely so in India. So it's a tremendous pleasure to welcome this esteemed panel of experts from across the world and learn a bit about what are they doing to grow the startup ecosystems in their country. So as I introduce the panel, what I would request each person to take 2-3 minutes to give us just an initial understanding of how you see the startup ecosystem, the role it plays in your country, and why it's the importance that it has for you. So I will start. I'll start with Anat Bernstein-Reich. Anat is the Vice President of Israel Asia Chamber of Commerce. Anat, she is also the president of Thai Israel and the co-founder and managing director of A&G Partners. Anat, I have no idea how you do all of this at one time, but absolutely awesome. She's an investment banker and business development specialist for emerging markets. She has co-founded several startups in Boston, Santa Clara, and in Israel, and worked with Israeli technology incubators to promote strategic partnerships between Israeli and American technology companies. So Anat, pleasure to have you. Look forward to your opening statement.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks for having me in this very important summit. When you talk about Israel, and you see in my background, we call ourselves the startup nation. And the startup ecosystem is, I would say, a central industry even in Israel. And I can say that it has, a domino effect in a positive way. First, everybody wants to have his own startup. This is the culture of risk takers. It's okay to fail. And of course, it's even better to succeed. And when people open the paper in the morning and they see that Mobileye was sold to Intel and the founders, all of them are spread in the first page, everybody wants to be there. So even my hairdresser would like to have a startup. and he developed an algorithm for coloring hair. My next door neighbor, she's a teacher, and she developed a system to help kids which are challenged to write better, and so on. So everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. And so first, it's contagious. You want to be there. Thanks. Then it creates jobs. And this is the time during Corona, we need to be job creators, not just job seekers. And definitely the startup ecosystem creates people that create more companies, more employment. And I would say that the startup ecosystem also attracts money, FDI from abroad. We have all the multinationals coming to Israel and setting shop in order to enjoy the talent and hunt for the best new technologies available here. So I stopped counting how many R&D centers we have in Israel, but definitely those multinationals that come here in dozens help our economy. More than that, it helps the academia, because the academia is doing their academia job, I would say. They will do their research, but if they want to commercialize it, there is someone that wants to take it to the next level, and then they take royalties. So I think that the domino effect of the startup ecosystem affects every part of our life and improves it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anat. Very well said. Next, we have Mr. Kim Moon-young. And Mr. Kim is the president of KOTRA, Korea's Trade Investment Promotion Agency. He's an expert on emerging markets, and he has authored many publications highlighting opportunities for collaboration in emerging markets, among which is Strategy for Indian Market, which I'm sure will be of interest to many of us. Mr. Moon-young, request you to please make your opening comments. You're on mute, sir.
Here. Okay, as you know, Korea has been very successful in its export-driven economic development process, okay? And current Korean majors like Samsung and Hyundai was just a startup, even maybe 50 or 60 years ago. So I think Korea itself can represent this kind of startup phenomena or some spirit, okay? And especially, I wanted to focus on one specific model, okay? Korea has developed some industry-specific industry complex like Pohang by steel of the POSCO, and Ulsan, the Hyundai Motor and Hyundai Shipbuilding in Ulsan, and the industry complex. But recently, exactly 10 years ago, Korea has developed the innovation park just south of Korean capital Seoul. Its name is Pangyo. Okay, and currently around 1,300 Korean IT company, nano company, CT company, and the fourth generation companies are gathered into this Pangyo Innovation Park. Okay, yeah. Currently, each annual turnover from this complex is more than 100 billion US dollar. Okay, more than 20% of the Korean budget is just from this innovation complex. Okay, so as Ms. Anat from Israel pointed out, this innovation park, Pangyo Innovation Park, is the complex where the domino effect or some synergy effect is gathered into from large company and the middle-sized company and the small and the medium-sized company, even startups. Okay, so from this kind of some specific complex, all resources are gathered into one specific place. Okay, including innovation, education, training, and the connecting these startups and the small and medium-sized company into overseas market. Okay, and our quota is supporting these Korean companies and startups into overseas market. Okay, that's my brief suggestion. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Next, we have Mr. João Borga, who's the Executive Director of Startup Portugal. A tremendous enthusiast about innovation, technology, and of course has played a very critical role in the growth of the startup ecosystem in the country. So João, welcome and look forward to your opening comments.
Hi all. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here amongst so well-considered peers. In Portugal, the importance of the startup ecosystem is paramount. We came out of a recession in 2013 and the startups led the way. We saw how they changed the way things were being done and they moved faster and look at the international markets in a different way. The recovery from the financial crisis, the culture of the recovery from the financial crisis in part was led by this community. They now represent about 1.1% of the GDP and 2.2% of exports. And for some of these countries might not mean that much, but for a country as Portugal, it's actually important because we're talking about companies with less than 5 years old and which are startups, which are innovators. We're not talking about all the different companies. So I think that's key part of the importance they have. But they do also do other things. They've been enabling the return of our best HR people and attracting HR people from other places. So technology-driven, like researchers working on AI, nanotechnology, machine learning, and many other forefront fields are now able to return to Portugal and find their jobs and do what they think it's the best for their careers, which is always good. And they also bring new topics to the table. So the way startups do things do not match sometimes with big corporations, with the way traditional business works. And by having success, like some of our unicorns are having, they change the way that the rest of the society thinks. They change the way the rest of the society tries to address business and daily-to-day operations. They imprint faster movement into the economy. So it's not only what they do themselves, or in terms of innovation and new products and the position of the country, but it's also the synergy effect they have on the rest of the economy. Thank you.
Beautifully said. Absolutely agree. Next, we have Mr. Edwin Chow. Edwin is the Assistant CEO of Enterprise Singapore. And Edwin, I just love the way you've described your focus, which is ensuring Singapore becomes a center of marketable innovation projects, which is such a fantastic way of putting it. Edwin, look forward to your opening comments.
Thank you very much, Debjani, and thank you for the invitation. Very glad to be here. Enterprise Singapore is a government agency that helps Singapore-based and Singaporean SMEs and startups to grow in Singapore and overseas. So, to address your point about market-led innovation and the importance of the startup ecosystem to Singapore, I just have to, in a way, echo what some of my colleagues have already said. Right? It is important. Our ecosystem in Singapore is relatively small compared to ecosystems elsewhere. There are only about 3,800 innovative startups, tech startups, less than 5 years. They create about 22,000 jobs, most of them very good jobs. In 2019, startups here attracted about 10 billion Singapore dollars worth of venture capital investment. Right? So the numbers speak for themselves. Yes, compared to the rest of the world, relatively small, but I think they punch above its weight in here in Singapore. Another reason is, again, what João mentioned just now, the impact that they have in transforming the rest of the industry, the sectors that they serve. Right. So, for example, startup like some of you may have heard like Grab, which is the equivalent of Uber, I suppose, in the West, they by having shaken up the car sharing industry in Singapore, then going on to introduce e-commerce, digital transactions, that has catalyzed the transformation of your mom and pop shops, your retail shops, your F&B outlets, and it's forced them as well to become more innovative and more competitive, more relevant and technologically enabled. And for a country like Singapore, Freudian slip there, for a country like Singapore, which has to remain relevant because of our small size and our relatively high cost, this culture of innovation, of developing solutions to problems that people are prepared to pay to solve, I think that's important in and of itself. And it's an important part of our transformation of the Singapore economy, so that in 10, 20 years' time, Singaporeans and Singapore residents will still remain relevant and have a pathway to success.
Absolutely. Next, we have Mr. Rutger de Graaf. He is from Netherlands Enterprise Agency. And interestingly, Rutger, you're focused on supporting international startups, talent, founders in Netherlands, which is a very interesting aspect of the startup ecosystem that we'll talk about. But look forward to your opening comments.
For sure. First of all, thank you all for having me, and also my colleagues who just went before me. I realized that with all of you, specific nations, we have a relationship concerning startup and scale-ups, and we work already together, and that's great to see. Well, for the Netherlands, we realized that our workforce is really dynamic, but it can never compete in a world market. I mean, within the European Union, yes, but within the Netherlands, that will be really difficult. We have 16, 17 million inhabitants. And if you look at how many specialists in IA we would probably need this year, we have a big problem. Even if we homegrown them, educated in the universities, we will not be able to have the output we need to grow our companies in these sectors. And as our companies are more and more international orientated, so the market is not Europe, the market is directly global, we just see that it's important to be connected and to have that connections in the digital age. Corona only made that more obvious, and our whole idea is this is a first challenge. There will be way more, but our slogan is solve global challenges together, and that's something we try to work on really hard in this case. For that, we have a really open policy towards knowledge migration and connections there, also for entrepreneurs.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I thought
no way. I made a pass, so no worries there.
Thank you. Last but not the least, I'm extremely pleased to welcome Mr. Nakajo-san from Executive Vice President, Japan External Trade Organization. Welcome, Nakajo-san, and would you like to make your opening statement?
Thank you very much, Devjay. My name is Nakajo from JETRO. We are TP Trade Promotion Organization, IPO Investment Promotion Organization. So I will touch upon this with the how we try to collaboration between Japan and India and also elsewhere of the world. First of all, Japan has been kind of taking track of the in-house kind of development model by the corporate. So this has been preventing startup community to grow in Japan. Although things has been changed in this, say, 1 or 2 decades, and now this development has being eclipsed by the aspiration of Japanese companies to shift toward the open innovation. As a result, paradigm change for open source-based digital transformation is currently accelerating in Japan, now DX, or digital transformation, buzzword for Japanese companies. And I think the scene has totally changed. And what I could say is that we are now trying to connect Japanese corporate with global startups, including Japanese startups. And with that, we are trying to create more and more ecosystems in Japan and try to boost Japanese startups and also in startups being successful in Japan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me kick this off with the most obvious question, which is the role of government in shaping the startup ecosystem. I mean, in every country, the government leads from the front when it comes to startups, and government policies have a huge role to play in building sustainable startup ecosystems. So what I would love to get from a few of you is, what is that one policy in your country that really made a difference? And you know, it can be used as a global best practice by other countries. So Edwin, let me start with you. For Singapore, what would you like to share in terms of policies that have really made a difference to the startup ecosystem?
Thanks. Well, Debjani, if you don't mind, I'd like to cheat a little bit and offer not one, but perhaps two.
Please go ahead.
I think has made the biggest difference. Any startup ecosystem, Singapore is no different, probably requires three things to succeed, right? You need money, obviously, venture capital in particular. You need talent, both technical talent as well as founders. And then finally, you need some bridge to market. We're fortunate in that in Singapore, the first condition, it's not quite a problem for us. We are a financing hub. There is a private wealth here and there's active investors here. Talent, we have no lack of smart people, both indigenous as well as immigrant. But historically, they've always been very, shall we say, cautious. The complete opposite of the Israeli model. When I was growing up, many of my peers who were smarter than me, they all wanted to be working for multinationals. They wanted to be professionals and so on. Entrepreneurship was the career of last resort. This, to some extent, changed a bit with the introduction of policies to encourage undergraduates, entrepreneurial undergraduates, to spend 1 year interning in a startup in overseas tech hub, like, for example, Silicon Valley or Bangalore or even London and so on. And many of our young men and women, when they went out, they saw that what some of their peers in the universities there were doing, quitting school, raising $1 million with 10 PowerPoint slides. When they came back, they got excited, they got bitten by the bug, and they went on to start companies. Many of our most successful companies today was started by graduates who went through this particular entrepreneurship program. So policies that really change the culture of our young people in Singapore, I think that would be the one thing that I would recommend to everyone. The second thing is, and you alluded to this earlier, this idea of bringing innovations to market or market-led innovation. Now in Singapore, we spend a lot of money in R&D. About 1% of our GDP is spent on R&D every year. Many of the science and the scientists behind it, right, they tend to look at things through the lens of their work. So everything that they do is the best thing since sliced bread. It's a science push or tech push approach. But we all know in the real world, usually it's what the market bears that will really catalyze and bring about success. So what we have done is very simply go out and talk to, use Singapore as a place to test and develop solutions to problems that governments, industry, consumers are prepared to pay to solve. Validate it here. Once it's validated, then tap on some of the networks that we have established to bring these innovations globally. We introduced a policy or program called the Global Innovation Alliance. And by the way, we have a partner in India that's part of this alliance. It's essentially a network of innovation partners, intermediaries that can help Singapore-based startups take their ideas overseas. We have a partner in Bangalore, Anthill Ventures, that we're very pleased with, and we're hoping to set up more. And there are 14 others spread all around the world. So these will be the two sort of programs that I think are policies that has worked well for us here in Singapore. Over to you.
Excellent. I mean, both are brilliant. Mr. Kim, let me come to you. The Korean government has one of the largest funding programs for startups, I think, than any other country, right? How important is it, do you believe, how important a role has it played in the development of a successful, innovative startup ecosystem we see in Korea? And what are the other areas that the government is involved in? You're on mute. Mr. Kim, you're on mute. Yes.
Okay, to be frank with you, I am not a policymaker. Okay, it's my personal understanding of your question will be, Korea has spent more than 4% of the GDP into R&D. Okay, maybe world top level.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned in my previous comment, okay, Korea is a small country, okay, compared to India and Japan and China, okay. So, Korean government has paid number one priority to the technology and R&D development, okay. So, that's why the Korean company like Samsung and Hyundai has become world major companies, okay, throughout this kind of financial support, marketing support, and R&D support, okay. So, but the one thing I want to focus on is that Korea's almost all the focus is for the global market, overseas market, okay? In case of Korean company, regardless of their size, okay? Every Korean company, including startups, are targeting the world market from the start, okay? So, and I think this kind of mindset is incorporated into Korean companies' businessmen and entrepreneur, okay? And almost every Korean government policy is focused on this one, okay? Our KOCHRA and Korean government is operating R&D center in many, many countries, okay? Including Silicon Valley, Tokyo, and even the Beijing, and even in India, we are operating the startup incubation center in Gurgaon, just, okay, in Delhi and Bangalore, okay? And all the supporting agency and the embassy, even embassy are supporting this kind of incubation center from the financial sector, market information sector. And I think this kind of global approach from the beginning will be maybe the representative section of the Korean policy in the direction. Okay, it's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, you made a very interesting point about the role of government in building the culture, the mindset of the startup ecosystem. Anat, I'll come to you. I mean, one of the initiatives which I personally am fascinated by is YOSMA. Which was I think it's one of the best designed fund of funds that I've ever heard about. And it's been so effective, I believe, in the development of the startup ecosystem. Could you talk a little, I think that's a fantastic best practices for other governments, countries to think through. Could you talk a little bit about it? And if there's anything else that you believe that other governments should be looking at?
So you rightly pointed to the point where it all started. And in early 90s, the government started a venture capital, which called YOSMA, that was initially government money. Later, it got privatized, and it actually created the VC community in Israel. Now, on the same time, Israel was how would I say, having a lot of immigrants from Russia coming to Israel. And they didn't have jobs, but they had talent and education. So that's when the incubator, the technological incubator program started. And it solved employment. It also built incubators in the periphery, not just in Tel Aviv or in the big cities, but really they opened incubators, I would say, in rural Israel. And those new immigrants got a job, got a place to really use their talent. A lot of mathematicians, physics majors, sciences, and that's where the incubator program started. And in along Yozma, the technology incubator program really made a difference, because in those technology incubators, the government put 85% of the funds, and the rest were put by the incubator itself or by other investors. And that made a change, because suddenly you can be an entrepreneur, not with your money. You don't have to bring anything but just yourself. And you can stay in this incubator for 2-3 years. And since then, incubators in Israel mushroomed. Over the years, the model changed, because incubator now, there are only 20 government incubators. But in addition, there are dozens of incubators from many other venture capital, universities, multinationals, etc. It's industries. Everybody wants his own incubator because they want access to technology. So suddenly you have an incubator in everything, in healthcare, in energy, in mobility, in any aspect. You have a specific incubator, which is a cluster of knowledge. So, and that's what exactly started where you said. In addition to today, we have the Innovation Authority, which is a focal point for funds. And if you are an entrepreneur, you only have to have a business plan in order to get some money to do a feasibility study, to do some business plan. And you have all those programs that allow you some more money as you go along with mentorship, along with access to knowledge, along with special programs for piloting. So the Innovation Authority plays a major role. And it was you, Edwin, that mentioned that you are spending 1% on R&D. Israel is spending 4% on R&D of the GDP. This is a major factor for the success. We need to look at those numbers, and definitely it shows value. And that's why Israel grew to be such a force in the R&D and startup ecosystem.
Yeah, the Israeli story is such a fantastic story, and absolutely, it's fascinating. Joao, I'll move to you, and shifting gears a little bit. Let's talk about the importance of the ecosystem in growing entrepreneurs, successful startups, where academia, large industry, everyone has to play a role. How is Portugal shaping this kind of a connected ecosystem that the startups can, or the entrepreneurs can benefit from?
So some of the things that are helping to shape this community are the values that are inherited to the ecosystem. So some of the things that glue all these people together are innovation and new technology, and but also other societal values. So social development goals, equality, having opportunities for different people. Those are things that are helping shaping this community, driving the society to the future. Environmental goals are things that help these communities to stick together and to match in terms of culture to what we want for a society for the future. It's not only, although making money, it's the most important thing that all entrepreneurs do, let's be clear. also the way that they make money, the way that they're going to build our future, it's something that helps shape the community and the ecosystem and drives the younger generations to be attracted to those. So those are things that we are pushing forward in terms of funding and programs and support. But also things that we have been doing and reading pretty much of the best cases in history and the best examples, such as Israel, as was mentioned. We now have 150 incubators and accelerators in the country, divided by different verticals and specializations, covering the whole territory. And they do not take equity. They do not take part on the company. So they are virtually free for the entrepreneurs to decide to build their startups. And that helps lower the burden on the failure, lower the burden on the risk, and drive more younger people to try to build their startups. So these are some of the ways that we've been shaping in the past years what is the ecosystem. The things that we are now trying that I think are really making the difference are trying to incentivize researchers and people in universities to try to go through this path and try to make their research into something that it's viable to society, not only bringing more knowledge to the table, but also try to bring some of the profitability of what they do. And that is one of the things. The other thing is sharing with the world, doing events like Web Summit, doing events like this, sharing, putting a stage on things that you are doing. And by doing that, not only helping shape our own community, but helping shape the other communities, if we can, humbly.
Brilliant, brilliantly said. Rutger, recently, there was a report, I think the Global Startup Ecosystem Report 2020 by Startup Genome, which showed that Netherlands had moved from 5th to 3rd position as the best startup ecosystem in Europe. So congratulations for that, first of all. And second, the question is, what were some of the key drivers of this growth? What made the shift for you?
I think it's twofold, and I will try to explain that. One of them was that we really tried to have a labor market perspective on this all, because what we realized is that our younger generation that graduates from universities is not really willing at this moment to dive into the corporate existence, to dive into the traditional big companies. They are still looking at that work-life balance of more student-orientated, more in their own dynamic circle, with a certain freedoms, time-wise and planning-wise, and where they can work on more radical ideas and concepts. So that enabled us to really make that connection. In the Netherlands, we're not really individual risk takers, but we're risk takers in groups. So at the moment you put 4 Dutchies or Dutchie and a foreign entrepreneur together, then they're there. So they need that little incentive. So we really focused on our universal centers, so research centers, but mostly the spin out there. So we try to involve at the technical universities entrepreneurial skill sets, centers where entrepreneurial skill sets were taught, connecting our economic universities that are focusing there on to our technical universities and trying to have that related variety come together. And we really see that it's working out. People are choosing more and more to start their career working at startups, at scale-ups mostly at the moment. And this is also something we saw with India in this case. We have homegrown Indian entrepreneurs. They did their masters in the Netherlands, they stayed. They're running relatively large companies now with overwhelmingly Dutch employees. So that's something that really shown us that that's the center for us, where we need to focus on, the mindset of who's going to fill these jobs and these companies. And next to that, there came a lot of more capital in the market. I mean, also the Netherlands have seen a tremendous increase in venture capital on the local market. The Dutch government supporting a lot of seed capital funds, like we do 50-50 on them, and all the risk is mostly at the government side and not at the entrepreneurial side. So that makes a lot of difference to be able to have that growth, that job growth also in the back.
Yeah, that's a fascinating story. And Nakaju-san, I think Rutger talked about it, but it's come out again and again about the importance of bringing in international talent and expertise into your country as you grow a healthy startup ecosystem. Now, one of the issues, I think, or challenges with respect to Japan is the language and the culture barrier, which is very different, very unique, and it makes it difficult for people to not only break into that but also get accepted. So, is this something that the Japanese government is actually looking into? And is there anything that the Japanese government is doing to ensure that international talent, international entrepreneurs can come into Japan and actually start businesses there?
Yes. Yes, thank you very much for the question. Now, English is not a big concern for initiate business in Japan. Besides, to penetrate into Japanese market, localization, including language and necessary process. For this sake, quality partner or local talent is the key to successful for foreign startups in Japan. Besides, inviting a kind of new, inviting international talent is the one of the key policy for Japanese government. And we have eased the visa requirement for those who has got kind of high regulated experience, and also we now created startup visa, which is applied for the foreign startup to come and start their business in Japan. For the cultural side, maybe not a big concern anymore. As I said, acquiring external resources, including foreign resources, is the very concerned matter for Japanese big corporate. And those who have got good resources are all welcome into in Japan.
Great to know that, and thank you. Edwin, I'll come back to you. I think the pandemic 2020 pretty much changed all our lenses with respect to how we looked at the priorities, etc. Definitely for the startup ecosystem, it was a tremendous stress test. But I think most of our startup ecosystems have shown resilience, have shown the ability to pivot. And as a result of it, we're also seeing some new segments emerge, which didn't exist before. Remote working is one area, contactless services is another area, etc. So what are some of the areas that you are very excited about that you're seeing emerge in Singapore, where you believe that the next level of growth and innovation is going to happen?
Well, yes, you're absolutely right, Debjani. COVID-19 has really shaken up a lot of things in Singapore, just like anywhere else in the world. Startup system was ecosystem was no different. There were a few things that happened that really hit home to us here in Singapore. What some of the problems, how existential some of the problems are, and how we had to quickly marshal all resources, right? Whether it's big companies, SMEs, or startups to try and solve them. And this has created opportunities, I think, for startups in this space. So two that I would like to highlight. The first is in the area of agri-tech, food and agri-tech. As you know, Singapore is a very small nation. We're an island nation, 700 square kilometers, 5.5 million mouths to feed. So we are completely dependent on food and produce, shipped in or trucked in from either Malaysia, Indonesia, and so on. So when COVID-19 hit, in the initial phases back in March, April, borders were shut. And suddenly we realized that, hey, it's how vulnerable we are. We were down to, weeks worth of fresh vegetables and so on. And this accelerated a move, a strategy that the government had prior to 2020, which was to try and grow 30% of Singapore's calorie intake, of our population in Singapore by 2030. It's a 30 by 30 tagline. And COVID just basically showed how stark and how real this danger was. And as a result, venture capitalists started piling into agri-tech solutions. For example, a local urban farming company called Sustainir managed to raise $20 million, to grow fresh vegetables, fruit and vegetables in Singapore. A company called Apollo Marine found a way to increase the yield of farmed fish, again farmed on land, onshore in Singapore. And they were able to break a lot of regulatory hurdles because of COVID. So this trend, I think, is continuing. It also feeds into the broader consumer trend of wanting to know where your food comes from. Sustainability, food that's sustainably grown, that doesn't is carbon neutral. And we think that there are very strong sort of tailwinds behind this sector, and we're seeing many startups coming on board as well. The second area, of course, is the more obvious one. It's healthcare, and more specifically, diagnostics. So in Singapore, one of the strengths that we have actually is in the area of medical technology and medical diagnostics. And we have a number of startups that's been gaining traction in this space. Now, again, COVID happened, and suddenly, you needed temperature scanners, you needed a quick diagnostics confirmatory test to see if you have the virus. So that led to a number of medtech startups, medical device companies who pivoted to solve this need. So one of them is a startup called Chronic Care. Their main product actually is a little software and a widget that you can add onto your phone, and you use that to accurately measure wounds, the size of wounds, which is very important in sepsis and also in early identification of diabetes. Right? And they're actually doing a trial right now in India together with one of your hospital groups. So anyway, Chronic Care realized that their technology could also be used to enable mass temperature screening of people. So instead of having to, have one person at a time, with a gun, temperature gun pointing at his head, you could actually screen up to 30 or 40, all within the view of one camera lens. And this was quickly tested and deployed here in Singapore with our Ministry of Health. And they are now actually trying to find a partner in India to do the same thing. So this sort of areas, right, food and agri-tech, sustainability, as well as medical tech and medical devices. I think these are two areas that we think has accelerated because of COVID.
Thank you. Another similar question to you, but I'll put it a little differently, which is, what do you think were the key learnings for the startup ecosystem from this crisis that we all not just went through, but are going through? And what are some of the biggest opportunities you see for the ecosystem come out of it?
I need to unmute myself. The learning, I think, are international. I mean, you need to be frugal. You need to really plan for crises like that, even for startups. So that was, I think, that startups in all our countries faced the same. And so did VCs. They learned that they have to have some funds to support, VCs or investors, some funds to support their existing startups. In Israeli perspective, of course, healthcare, diagnosis, like Edwin said, we also saw a lot of remote medicine developing. And remote medicine is not something new, but suddenly people started to really use it. Till then, doctors had this opportunity, but now if I want to go to my doctor, they prefer that I'll do a Zoom call with my doctor. And if I'm really insisting, they'll allow me to meet the doctor. So those solutions were developed or adapted, I would say, recently. Another sector that I'd like to highlight is the education technology, because suddenly with all our kids staying at home, they need new solutions and not just the frontal teacher talking. So all the edtech companies immediately adapted themselves to this new situation. And I see dozens of edtech companies now working with schools or with the parents to give more solutions to the kids that are tired all day long sitting in those small puzzle of kids and trying to learn something. So definitely the education technology got a big boost and it's here to stay. The beauty of this era, the 1 year that we experienced, is that those solutions are here to stay. Those international conferences, like the one that we are attending now, will not change. I mean, of course, we prefer to meet each other and have dinner together, but it gave us a new opportunity to really have all of us under one roof. And we got used to it. And more companies, in addition to Zoom and Meets and all those, are now developing advanced solution for international conferences. And I can elaborate, but really the COVID has its flaws, but we all see that there are also benefits. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think that's Joao, I'll come to you. Any key takeaways from the crisis, the biggest lessons that it taught us, especially for the startup ecosystem?
Yeah, a couple of them. We were more digital than we thought. It was very quick the way that startups moved away from physical presence to remote working and doing a lot of these things remotely. That was an amazing experience, humbling and amazing at the same time. And the second key takeaway, it's the powerful of the will of the community. So like we heard in India or in Singapore or in other countries, when the society was presented with a challenge and the urgency to resolve something that was important to everyone, at least in Portugal, we end up with 5,000 volunteers developing 72 volunteer projects to solve issues that we had, from PPEs to many other things. And they would give half of the time from their startups to solve the society's problems. So that was another key takeaway. So how powerful it is when you can mobilize the whole ecosystem to one single objective. And that was really, really important. I was impressed with it. But above all, it is how suddenly a single simple virus changed the way society works, and our startups, based on the pivot principle of management for startups. And they were able to survive and prosper actually in this environment by changing the way they approach their business models and the way they do things. So this is a key takeaway for the startup community and for the business community. Do like startups and they will survive more and do more throughout the lowers of the economy.
This has been a fascinating conversation and there's so many more questions, but unfortunately we have to wrap up. So I'm going to request each one of you to just sum up your key point in a minute, because we literally have just 5 minutes. So I'm going to start with you, Mr. Kim, if you could please sum up your key points on the global best practices. You are again on mute.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. Okay. Today, I am so happy to get the big picture about how the startup ecosystem is changing in each country. And as I told you, I am not a specialist of this startup, but I am so happy to get great the information and knowledge from so excellent panelists like you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Rutger, would you go next?
Thank you all. And central will be we need to solve global challenges together, and the Netherlands is open for that, and we welcome you to connect to us.
Thank you. Nakaju-san?
Thank you very much for this session, and it was so fruitful and very informative. Last thing I would like to mention is that we will soon launch a new kind of website which will facilitate international collaboration between Japanese corporate and international startup community. So once it has been ready, I will inform you, and we welcome all of your participation for this. Thank you.
Thank you. Edwin?
Well, I would go back to the two themes of talent and market that I think are critical for startups to succeed. And here in Singapore, I would recommend for the audience, if you have time, to check out the website called openinnovationnetwork.gov.sg. And that's where we have tabulated all of the innovation challenges. I mentioned earlier, problems that government agencies, companies in Singapore and in the region, challenges that they anticipate and that they are prepared to pay to solve, and they throw it out to startups from all around the world, Singapore, India, Netherlands, and we would welcome all of these startups to come to Singapore, take advantage of this platform to try, as Rutger mentioned earlier, solve regional, global, maybe a bit of a stretch, but let's start with local and regional problems. Thank you.
Thank you. Joao?
I would like to thank you all for sharing the knowledge and to be here with us, and for the invitation for this amazing panel. I would like to emphasize that Portugal is an open country, and we welcome entrepreneurs from all over the world. We have a startup visa program. We have a Portugal, India hub where it explains everything that you need to know. And we do have people to answer your questions in the one-stop shop on our website. So thank you all, and have a great Saturday. Thank you.
Thank you. Anat?
Thank you. Thank you all for this wonderful session. I'd like to invite Indian startups to collaborate with Israeli startups. We have a fund set by our own governments, the I4F. So do look for this program for funding. You know that we always need funds to take it forward. So log into the Y4F of the Innovation Authority and GITA. And if you would like to connect to Israeli startups, you have the Israel Asia Chamber of Commerce, you have Thai Israel. Approach us, and we are happy to assist any Indian companies to log in, and vice versa. The Israelis, of course, we are working closely. Bring our ecosystems together. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It's been a fascinating discussion. I have learned so much from all of you. Thank you so much for taking the time. And I think you've called out the importance of the role of government, the role of policies, not just in funding, but development of talent, development of the R&D or innovation culture, as you called it, mindset, etc. And you also called out the need for global collaboration, which I think is so important going forward. So thank you once again to all of you. It's been a fascinating discussion.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.